If someone asked me who I think the five most important guitar players in history are, I would say it starts with Charlie Christian, then Wes Montgomery, Jimi Hendrix, Allan Holdsworth, and then Eddie Van Halen. And of course, there's been plenty more guitar players that have been important, but I would say out of all of them, those are the top five most important for various reasons. But Tony Williams, the drummer, was asked, "Who do you think the most important guitar player after Jimi Hendrix is?" And he said Allan Holdsworth. And as I'm sure some of us know, Tony Williams hired Holdsworth to join Tony's band. And what's kind of interesting, well, there's a lot of things that are interesting about Holdsworth, but he was admired and is admired by musicians of all sorts. I mean, a lot of rock musicians and jazz musicians cite him as an influence, or at least respect and have a lot of admiration for what he accomplished. And Holdsworth really was a genius, I think. I mean, Steve Vai, Yngwie Malmsteen, and Eddie Van Halen said if they could only choose one guitar player as the greatest of all time, they would choose Allan Holdsworth. And there's been other musicians and guitarists that have said the same. But yeah, he's definitely one of my favorites. And one of the things I really love about Allan Holdsworth is the fact that he forged his own way and was a true artist. And he really didn't fit into any particular category. And he grew up listening to jazz and was influenced by jazz and classical, and learned some Charlie Christian solos and bought every John Coltrane record he could get. But then at some point he realized he wanted to just go his own way and develop his own kind of music. And he even said that when he listened to the saxophonist Cannonball Adderley, and then he listened to John Coltrane, the thing he noticed was he could tell in Cannonball Adderley's playing where Cannonball had come from. He could hear the bebop and the tradition in his playing. Whereas with Coltrane, he heard this very unique, innovative way of playing. And so he really got inspired by Coltrane to forge his own way and develop his own kind of music. And he really had a beautiful mix of very modern kind of harmonic sensibilities, almost kind of modern classical type of harmony, a lot of non-functional harmony, tons of non-functional harmony, right? And then the linear stuff was very modern jazz oriented, Coltrane influenced, but it was his own way of playing linearly. And then he played with rock kind of grooves primarily, sometimes some swing grooves, but primarily kind of rock grooves with jazz sensibilities, because the drummers he played with were, jazz-oriented kind of drummers. So it had those kind of sensibilities. And then also rock kind of sounds, the drums themselves, and then his guitar tones. And he primarily played with electric bass. So yeah, really interesting mix of all those elements. And he was asked if he could only grab two records if his house was on fire. He would grab John Coltrane's Coltrane Sound album, and he would grab a Debussy record with that had Claire de Lune on it. He loved that piece by Debussy. And for me, I'm still studying straight ahead jazz, and I study classical and play both those types of music. But then for my original stuff, I really try to forge my own way. And so he's definitely been an inspiration for me in that way. I don't play anything like him, which would kind of defeat the whole purpose, right? As far as being influenced by him. I think a really helpful way to be influenced by people is to be inspired by them, but not do exactly what they did. Just be inspired by the fact that they were artistic and found their own way of doing things. And, a couple more things about Holdsworth is he never strummed chords. He only grabbed the harmony like a piano, all the notes kind of simultaneously. So all the harmonic and melodic stuff, the tunes, the compositional parts were very often played with a clean sound with kind of finger style. And then when he went to the linear stuff, he would have the distortion and use a pick and play linearly. And he said he didn't want to play the blues. He never wanted to play the blues. On one of the records here, he does play a Joe Henderson blues, but it's a pretty twisted blues. But yeah, so I thought it would be fun to dive into his records. The only one I don't have that's part of his discography is the very last record he did, called Flat Tire, Music for a Non-Existent Film. And it's basically a solo guitar record. So that's the only one that I'm not listing here. And I'm going to also talk about 5 records where he's a guest. He's a sideman. But so I'm going to go from my least favorite to my favorite. And yeah, so Velvet Darkness, which he hated because it wasn't even supposed to be released. So this has got a very grungy, kind of almost demo-like quality to it, very jammy-oriented, but it's a fun record to listen to. And then his record Sand. So this is during the period when he started using the syntax, and which was a crazy-looking instrument that he actually blew into. And part of his inspiration for doing that was he didn't even like the guitar. He wanted to play the saxophone when he first got interested in playing music. But at the time where he lived, guitar was cheaper than a saxophone. So he got a guitar. So isn't that funny? You know, one of the greatest guitar players of all time didn't even really like the guitar. So he developed this instrument called the syntax, and he uses it heavily on that record and some of the other records I'm going to talk about. And yeah, so he blew into a tube to create the notes. I don't know all the mechanics of it, but I know that was part of the equation. But yeah, so it's got a very unique quality to it for sure. A lot of people like this record, Road Games. I think my favorite track on this is Tokyo Dream. And, you know, I'm just not a big vocal guy in general. I'm not a big fan of vocals in general, which I know that puts me in a minority. But especially so when, you know, vocals started to appear on his records, really from his first record. But then he's, thankfully from my perspective, got away from vocals. But yeah, this record is actually was helped by Eddie Van Halen. Eddie Van Halen got Allan signed to Warner Brothers, and according to Allan, it was just a disaster because the people at Warner Brothers started to take over and wanted him to do certain things, and he just refused to do what they wanted him to do, and it was just, you know, a terrible situation, and he ended up leaving the label. But that's, you know, part of the integrity of Holdsworth, right? Is the fact that even though he was on this big label, he refused to do anything that he didn't actually want to do artistically. This record, Not Too Soon, is mostly jazz standards, and I think there's at least one. There's one Beatles tune on here. There's a couple Joe Henderson tunes on here. There's a John Coltrane tune on here. But yeah, it's mostly jazz standards. And yeah, this is fantastic. Very unique in his discography. The only one like it. So a really fun record. His first record, IOU. See, this would rank a lot higher for me if it didn't have vocals on it. But otherwise, the playing is great. And yeah, this is really good. Yeah, if it just didn't have the vocals, this would rank a lot higher for me. And yeah, he played with kind of particular musicians, mostly Jimmy Johnson on bass, Scully Severson's on one record, but a lot of it is with Jimmy Johnson on bass, and then a lot of the keyboard work is either done by Gary Husband, Steve Hunt, or Gordon Beck. And then a lot of the drumming is either Vinnie Colaiuta, Chad Wackerman, or Gary Husband, because Gary Husband was just, or is, a phenomenal musician on both keyboards and drums. So he played with Gary Husband on both those instruments. And Vinnie Colaiuta's on this record, Secrets, my next record by Holdsworth. And there's a mix of the syntax and guitar on this record with a little bit of vocals. But yeah, there's a lot of killer tracks on this one. A lot of people really like this record by him, but again, for me, the vocals kind of make it hard for me to really like this record. But Metal Fatigue, it's a great record. It's got some really signature stuff by him. Solos and riffs and things. Really cool record. All right, and then this one is really cool. It was done in the 80s, but it's got a futuristic flavor to it. I mean, it almost sounds like something even now from the future. But his record, Atavachron, really cool. And yeah, there's a mix of guitar and syntax on this, and it's a mixture of musicians, but one of the musicians is Tony Williams that's on this. Yeah, killer record. All right, and then my top 4 here, Hard Hat Area. So this is with, I believe, Gary Husband. Let's see. Yeah, so Gary Husband on drums, Scully Severson on bass, and Steve Hunt on keyboards. And the cool thing about this record, which separates it from a lot of his other records, is this was actually a touring band. And they actually played a lot together live before going into the studio to record this record. So it's got a very band kind of quality about it, which is really special. Yeah, so this is killer. No vocals, yay. And then, yeah, he got away from the vocals, which, like I said, for me is what I prefer. And then his second to last record, 16 Men of Tain, he actually grabbed that title from on Glenmorangie, the Scotch, because Allan Holdsworth loved alcohol, particularly beer. But he grabbed 16 Men of Tain from the Scotch brand Glenmorangie. It says that somewhere in the label. But yeah, this one has acoustic bass, a couple of tracks with trumpet. So this is quite different as well from the other records in that way. Yeah, and more swing kind of grooves on this. But this is killer. This is really great. Really great. All right, and then my favorite studio record by him is Wardenclyffe Tower. This has got really cool vibes to it, some dark qualities to it. What's interesting about this one is he actually overdubbed his guitar solos on this. It doesn't sound like it, but that's the way he did this. And what's hilarious is at the end of the first track, there's some random dude that comes in, and it's almost kind of like the guys just entering the studio right after they play and asking, "Hey, what are you guys playing in there?" And then they say jazz, and he's like, "Jazz? I hate jazz." Yeah. So, anyways, there's what's really cool about this one is the bonus tracks on here. One of them is Tokyo Dream, and like I said, that's my favorite track from Road Games, and beautiful version of that on here. I think I like this version even better, actually. So, killer record. And then my favorite Holdsworth record is actually a live record, All Night Wrong. And the beautiful thing about this is it's trio, and Chad Wackerman on drums, Jimmy Johnson on bass, and you just get to hear Holdsworth just really stretch out and feed off of the guys improvisationally, and so it's just a really high energy, incredible. I think this is just a perfect, like, I don't know. To me, this is like the epitome of Allan Holdsworth right here. So really great record. And then I thought I would just share some of the records he was on as a sideman. He did a lot of sideman work before kind of going in his own direction. And even when he was doing his solo records, he kept doing guest appearances. But so one of the groups he was in was this fusion band called Soft Machine, and so they're record bundles. And then Jean-Luc Ponty, he was in that band, Enigmatic Ocean. All these are great records. And then, so, I am going from my least favorite to favorite here. And then Gong Gassus, I think that's how you pronounce it. Really fun record. Bill Bruford, One of a Kind. And then my favorite album where he's a sideman is with Tony Williams' record, or Tony Williams' band, Believe It. This is just fiery fusion, high energy fusion. If you're a fusion fan and you haven't heard this, you have to hear this. This is just might be my favorite fusion album. I don't know, hard to say. I really like some Weather Report stuff too, and Return to Forever. But this is killer. And yeah, so there's the Allan Holdsworth albums. Some thoughts of mine about him. Plenty more I could say, but amazing musician. I consider him one of the most important musicians of all time. A true artist, innovator, and I think his influence will continue to permeate. And yeah, I think his influence is just going to continue for a long time. All right, hope you enjoyed this.